You have worn so many hats over your career. Of course, you were the founder of Behance, which is the platform for creatives to discover and showcase content. You sold that to Adobe. You then stepped into the venture and startup space, where you invested in and advised many companies from Uber to Pinterest to Carta, Flexport, Row. You found your way back to Adobe, where you were Chief Product Officer and now Chief Strategy Officer. Where do you think we're headed with AI and creative tools? How will it change the way that creators, interact with the medium and think about creation?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. On the question about creative tools, listen, creativity and storytelling has been my passion forever. I think that historically, I got Photoshop when I was 13. And it took me maybe a year to learn a quarter of it. The uphill battle of learning how to leverage these tools, the learning curve has always been this great obstacle to people entering the space. And the skills required to use these tools are also a badge of honor for the people who have the skills. And now you have this moment where two things are simultaneously happening. The floor is going down, and suddenly more people can enter the world of storytelling. Whether you're a salesperson or a data analyst or a marketing person, you can kind of do your own thing as opposed to rely on others to tell your story. And then at the other side of the spectrum, you have the ceiling going up, where suddenly if you used to be an imaging professional or an illustrator or a motion graphics artist, you're now also able to create in video, you're able to create thumbnails without having to go to a graphic designer to do it for you, and you're able to push your category to another level. And now I think it's just, the world is going to be filled with humans trying to just differentiate themselves through creative expression because they're competing with agents, right? And I think that that's sort of this broad awakening. So it's exciting. But the early era of AI and creativity was somewhat disappointing in my view. It was very prompt-based. It was driven by these basic models. One core conviction I have is we're going from the prompt era to the controls era of AI-based creativity. And what I mean by that is you'll actually be able to generate assets with layers. Like you can think of Photoshop as layers. You can have a lot of levers to change things and get it exactly how it is in your mind's eye. So it's we'll see, but it's a new era. And of course, like the agent-assisted flows are also a very core part of all that.
As someone who has been at the forefront of building creative tools and advising creative tooling company for so long, we have a lot of creative tool builders in here, a lot of creatives in here. There are researchers and sort of technologists, some of which are creators themselves, some of which maybe aren't. But I'm curious, what are some of the misconceptions about building for creatives as someone who has done that their whole life?
Well, I think that creatives, and we're all creative, but like creative professionals, they hold dear their ability to achieve what's exactly in their mind's eye. And if you think about it, that's the antithesis of the notion of these generative AI models that essentially are trained on a discrete data set and always essentially output like the center of the distribution of the data that it was trained on. And so it's these are also creators who are oftentimes trying to stand out and do something different. And so in some ways, they're frustrated with the average manifestation of their prompt, right? They want something different. I think these creators want choice in models. So one of the concerns I have about the companies that are model companies competing in this space is that if you're a model company, it's hard to offer all the models. One of our major decisions that we made at Adobe over the last year is to actually become a platform agnostic model company. So we do build our own models in a way that's commercially safe and is important to a lot of our customers. But we're also going to support all the major models, and people are going to be able to choose which model they want for which action. And I imagine there will be probably thousands of models, some that specialize in animation or explosions or drone aerial shots or whatever the case might be. And customers, creatives, want to have their choice of what model, and they want to be able to use it in their workflows. Creatives have always complained about workflow, right? The whole notion of work and flow, like flow is the creative state where you can just like do whatever's in your mind, and work is what gets in the way of that. So if we can like remove more of the work from workflow, like that's the ultimate holy grail for most creatives. And I think that means that a lot of these pieces need to be in the same tool oftentimes.
Where do you see Adobe in that evolution of how creatives interact now with AI. You know, a lot of folks kind of think of some of these AI models as the camera.
Yep.
And then, you know, but of course there's AI assisted tools within some of the existing tool set. And so how do you think about where's the right place to expose AI?
We believe that all of our products, including the marketing products, not just the creative products, need to have AI in exactly the right time and place. So whether that means having an agent that critiques your design work, or can critique your design work based on a certain persona that you're trying to target with your marketing. Like that's something that we're surfacing within products like Photoshop as well as the marketing products. The ability to, of course, generative fill, generative expand, like all those sorts of things are integrated throughout the entire suite. But we're also building these net new native Gen AI products that are really throwing out the playbook of the assumptions of layers and everything else, and really just starting from scratch. And we talked about publicly a project called Project Concept, which is basically like mood boarding and concepting in the age of AI. So it can let you start with your work, it can let you source stuff from stock or wherever else, and then it lets you use, it has the Firefly models, but also has the Flux models, and you can just start to go crazy. And the cool part about it is that if you have an image here and an image here, you can use a little eyedropper and take some ingredients and aspects of this image and then apply it to this image and then use that as a prompt for your next image. So it's really like a remix type of product as an example of a native Gen AI product that we're building. So we're looking at both.
What creative problems do you think AI is unsuited to solve or help?
This is like one of the greatest questions I think about all the time now, because AI is only getting better. And yet, what makes creative content really effective is when creative content moves us in some way. Now, what makes something move you? It's usually emotionally triggering. It's usually a story you didn't expect. It's usually something that has to do with the taste and the meaning that was injected into the content by the creator. And AI is not good at that. You know, AI is good at doing things that have been done and applying things to formulas that have been declared as the good, efficient formulas on the internet for telling stories. But when you look at the content, I mean, if you talk to great directors, I spend a lot of time these days, you know, I'm really interested in the whole filmmaking and storytelling space, just personally, less Adobe, more personally. But I am, you know, when I talk to these directors, you know, they talk about how it's all about the timing, right? And you can have one scene with actors, and if it's like 1 second too long, either the joke doesn't land, or it's not emotional, or it's not real. And so much of that intuition is very much based on this director's personal view on the world. That is not something that I've seen to be replicable by AI. And so I think that these tools need to enable humans to, again, automate more of the work part so they can do more of the flow part. And the flow part, if you could spend 10 times the amount of time you have every day on the flow part, you can do even more meaningful, more incredible stories. So that part, the taste, you know, and if I were to sum up my declaration about my thesis for the next 10 years, it's going to be that taste will outperform skill, because skill is going to be offloaded to compute. And what's going to differentiate everything you do in life? Taste.
Do you think there are any use cases where you could have 100% generated, fully personalized for Scott Belsky entertainment experiences where there's no human interfacing?
Well, first of all, let's start definitely for marketing purposes. So we have a product called Gen Studio now, which is a ridiculous product. I mean, it's you take a campaign that you made, right? And then you say, great, I want to mount this folder of 10,000 images. I want to employ this copy agent to make 10,000 slogans. And then I want to create this in 120 languages. And then you push the button. And then literally it creates like 160,000 assets that you can then drive across platforms and do A/B testing and automate this and whatever else. Like that is the future. And when you think about all the production costs that is currently spent on stuff like that, it's just insanity, right? So there's no reason why that should be done manually. Like that should be done through AI. And now I think that with the human labor you free up from that meticulous production work, you're going to come up with, instead of one campaign to test, you're going to come up with 100 campaign ideas. You're going to raise the ceiling of what's possible, right? Now on the entertainment side, it's a little different. I happen to believe that part of the entertainment sensation is a shared experience. I can't talk about House of Cards with you if we saw a different House of Cards, right? And I will stop talking about it because I'll know that you saw a different one and it's not a shared experience. So I think that I would anticipate a hybrid. Sort of in the back of the Behance days, we always thought about building networks as like the 99-in-1 model. 90% of people consume, 9% sort of curate, and 1% create. And if you think about it, if you apply the same thing into this new world we're in, I imagine that 90% of people will just consume content and want a shared experience. Maybe 9% of people will be like, oh my gosh, like imagine if that episode ended this way, and they might engage in the tools that you allow them to with character, IP, and whatever licensing we have to make a variation, and maybe the 1% are the people who do that, and the 9% are the ones who curate and decide what's worth prime time, for everyone, for the 90% to see. So I think it's going to be a similar model, but I just don't think that everyone will have a personalized movie.
What has been the general reactions across the spectrum towards AI? Like which use cases are really diving in, which are more hesitant, and why?
Well, we're at a moment in time right now where there definitely are two factions on either side of the spectrum. On one side of the spectrum, there's a good swath of the creative professional community, especially illustrators and graphic designers, that are extremely threatened by this technology, really worried about the implications, and have become basically anti. I just think that you can never fight the advance of technology, right? But what you can do is find ways to make it work for you. And we're involved with the conversation with that community, and I think that they'll start to tinker and recognize that there may be appropriate ways or ways that they're comfortable with leveraging it, while also retaining their craft. On the other side, you have these kind of AI creative hackers who have basically discarded all their traditional tools and are like all in. And to them, it's like sacrilegious to use a product that is traditional. They just want to totally go pure AI.
I want to step back a little bit to the Behance founding experience. So it wasn't the traditional way that at least we think about starting companies. You bootstrapped for the first 5 years. As you got the company off the ground, and then later in the journey decided to raise venture funding. I'm curious, going back, would you have taken the same approach? How do you think of that in retrospect?
Yeah, I think about this a lot only because I get asked this question and I'm like not sure if it was the best or worst practice. I mean, we nearly died 5 years bootstrapping. The fact that we didn't meant that we could raise. Our first round was from Union Square Ventures, leading 5 years into the business when we were break even. So we actually only had to sell a very small portion, relatively speaking. And then when we got acquired, that played a real factor because our acquisition, apples to apples, I was like, oh gosh, like it's actually the same outcome as if we took 2 more rounds of funding and that much more dilution and that much more market risk. So I think it definitely played a beneficial role. At the same time, there were some sideways lost years of Behance in that 5 years. There were a couple of years where we were not able to afford the talent we should have been hiring. We were not able to level up the team the way we should have. And I was, for some reason, very proud of being a bootstrapped company and having control over my own destiny and that sort of thing. But then it was a stupid ego thing, because when my team started coming to me saying, I literally can't do the best work of my life here because I don't have the resources to invest in this opportunity. When we started to grow and we couldn't scale, I felt like an idiot. I was like, oh my gosh, like why am I depriving this team? And that's when we went and raised our round. So resourcefulness is a far more powerful capability than resources. Resources, when you have them, you throw them at problems like carbs. It feels good, but dissipates quickly. Whereas resourcefulness is like muscle. When you develop the capability to address challenges in the hard way, that sticks with you over time. And I think that capability developed during that 5 years was valuable to us.
What is maybe a contrarian view you have about AI? That you're surprised is a contrarian view in the landscape of the conversation.
I think that most models will be commoditized. Number one, what is it? Chat GPT 3.5 is now like 98% cheaper than it was when it launched, and 4.0 is already like 90% cheaper. It's so dizzying. As a result of that, I believe that these model companies that are currently powering all these products are going to have to go up the stack to capture the value in the business. And as a result of that, much like the flashlight app was a profitable application until Apple shipped the flashlight, right? And I mean, I think that similarly, there's going to be this large swath of applications that are wrapper apps, whatever, that are going to be just absolutely blown to pieces. But even developer applications and products, I mean, they have to go up the stack. And if you've raised billions of dollars to build these fundamental models that are ultimately commoditized, you absolutely have to. AWS did that. I mean, they went up the stack and started to build developer tools and new capabilities, and that was how they captured the margin of the business. I do think that that's the case. Maybe that's not completely contrarian, but there are still tons of excitement about these model companies, and I just think they're going to be ubiquitous. I guess another thing that I would just quickly say is also how much is going to happen on device. If you think about it, the on-device models are also becoming more powerful. The distance between the frontier models in the cloud and the on-device models for a lot of categories of usage is actually narrowing. And so at some point, if 90-something% of all the stuff that people want to do in your products is routed to a local model, then you're not paying any more COGS. These models are not making any more money, the big ones. So I also think people are underestimating the speed of local model meeting the bar.
Shifting in that direction towards your stint both investing and advising founders, what are some behaviors that you've detected, pattern matched across the most successful founders who and who you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, real quickly, rapid fire here, but sending rapid updates, like test flight updates and that sort of thing, that was, Ben Silverman at Pinterest did that, Kayvon at Periscope, like every week. I mean, it was just always getting it out there. There's something about holding your sort of feet to the fire and just constantly doing that, as opposed to founders that obfuscated what was happening away from their community investors. Like, very big positive signal there. Another one that I've learned is just, I think every founder has to be a great storyteller, but they shouldn't be a promoter. And the biggest investing mistakes I've probably made were not getting that red flag of someone who is making something look better than it was. Because when you're investing in someone, you want someone who faces the bad truth and speaks it to their team, to their board. Like, those are the people who expedite solutioning, and those who try to make everything look better than it is and present data with a bow around it and stuff. Like, those are the folks who will continue to do that and will obfuscate the truth away from their own teams. So I've always tried to I've become very allergic to the promotey stuff. And I try to look for very pragmatic storytellers. One of the things I like to say is, I try to be a leader who's both optimistic about the future, but very pragmatic and pessimistic about the present. I feel like I like also investing in people who are that way as well.
Are there any apps, as you think about AI, that you're hoping to have your hands on tomorrow? Like, what's the thing that you're not seeing in the market that you're?
I mean, well, one of the areas is definitely around health. We're going to look back at medicine. It's going to be the equivalent of bloodletting, back in the day. We're going to be like, wait a second. So you went into a doctor who gave you 5 to 15 minutes, and then you described your symptoms, and she took a glance at the chart, and then somehow in 1 minute decided with a very small data set of you and some other random stuff in the person's head, what your situation is. That is just absolutely insanity. I think it's overdue. I mean, doctors should all be augmented by AI, and also our personal relationship with medicine should be a very, forever context window type of experience. That seems, so obvious to me.
You've written a lot about kind of the future of work, and that's the question on everyone's mind these days with AGI looming is what happens, how do people fill their time? There's a lot of folks who talk about, creative endeavors taking up more of people's time, both professionally and personally. And is that how you see the wave shifting? Where do you think, how will humanity in
Yeah.
20 years time, spend our time?
A company, I've called them cognicos, and the idea is a cognition-driven stack. Like basically most of the business and the functions of the business ultimately running off of inference, right? And core models that are optimized for these functions. So if you can imagine, the future company is mostly compute, and then it has nodes that are the new version of functions. So there's like a node called HR and a node called marketing and a node called legal. Those nodes are probably running software like the stuff you're going to be building or you're building already. And the people that are manning those nodes, so to speak, those are stewards of the node. They're supposed to make sure that the node achieves OKRs and also follows the rules. Rules is going to be a big part of the AI world. Like everything's going to be about rules. And so the stewards manage the OKRs and the rules for the node and the technology underneath the node. And they're orchestration designers and orchestration engineers. And these orchestration designers and engineers are like basically taking all these different APIs and functional products of the node, and they're like wiring them up and making sure it uses inference efficiently and whatever else. So I call them the Cognico because it's almost like this cognition-driven company that is a whole different stack and a whole different role of people, right? Well, then the question is, if those companies require far fewer people, which I do believe that they ultimately will, what are people going to be doing? And so here I will look to Japan. Like I've always felt like Japan is like a little glimpse of the future. When we were, before the iPhone, if you wanted like futuristic phones and devices, you would go to Japan, and it was always like the future, right? I think similarly today, when you go to Japan, and they've been living in the future, everything's like a small micro business. When you go out to eat, it's like a place with 12 or 8 tables, and the bar, it's like 40 bars on one street, and each one has 6 chairs. And it's just this deeply craft-oriented, storytelling, very human, non-scalable experience at scale to some degree. And it's just like it's this plethora of small businesses. And so I do wonder, because if humans are going to be craving the scarce, non-scalable version of everything, right? Maybe humans will respond to that. Like maybe there will be a boom, 100x of small businesses, and they certainly won't have to do accounting anymore because that will be done by AI. So they can actually focus on the craft. And I think that will be like really exciting and a fun life to live. Like I love going to Tokyo.
Well, Scott, this has been amazing.
This is awesome.
We talked about everything from creativity to future of work to AI apps. Thank you for your unvarnished opinions and for your wisdom.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Thank you, everyone. I'm such a baby, and like when I'm sick, I just want people to console me, and no one in my family wants to partake in this. So I was like, I'm going to turn to Claude. So I'm like, Claude, like what's the incidence of flu, in the New York area? And Claude like answers, but then asks me a question. Are you drinking enough liquid? You should be taking this, you should be taking that. And at the end, Claude is like, do you want me to check on you tomorrow to see how your recovery is going? And I'm like, absolutely, And it just felt so good. And it was crazy because I'm like, this is an AI, except it's like more empathetic, which just maybe says something about my family. But